Some craters on Earth are so remote, we've only ever really seen them from space. A few take days of driving across open desert just to reach the rim. One is sealed inside a forbidden zone you can be arrested for entering. And at least one is so vast and so buried that from the ground you'd never even know you were standing inside a crater at all. Welcome to a list of the most impossible to reach impact craters on Google Earth, ranked from the one you can just barely drive to, all the way to the one almost no human is ever allowed to reach. Every scar on this list was punched into the planet by something falling out of the sky, and every single one is a shape that only really makes sense from directly overhead. Number 4 is sealed inside a forbidden desert. Patrolled for diamonds, step into it, and you're trespassing on one of the most restricted stretches of land on the continent. Number 3 is so swallowed by shifting sand that nobody even knew it was a crater until a space shuttle fired radar down through the dunes. And the final crater sits utterly alone in the Siberian Arctic, holding an unbroken record of the last 3.5 million years of Earth's climate in a place so untouched that the ice ages themselves never reached it. But let's start with number 1, a perfect dark ring punched into the red heart of the Australian outback, close enough to reach by road. And yet for almost all of human history, no one knew it was there. We begin in the Australian outback, on the northern edge of the Great Sandy Desert in Western Australia. From directly above, on Google Earth, it's unmistakable, an almost perfect circle stamped into flat red earth, a dark ring nearly 900 meters across with a pale floor at the center. This is Wolf Creek Crater, and it is one of the best preserved impact craters on the entire planet. The numbers are clean and brutal. The crater is about 875 meters, or roughly 2,870 feet, across, and drops around 60 meters, about 200 feet from the rim down to the crater floor. It was carved out when a meteorite estimated at around 15 meters wide, weighing something like 14,000 tons, slammed into the desert. For a long time, it was thought to be about 300,000 years old, but research published in 2019 pulled that number in dramatically. The impact is now believed to be less than 120,000 years old. In geological terms, this happened yesterday, and yet almost no one saw it for what it was. Wolf Creek was only brought to the wider world's attention after it was spotted during an aerial survey in 1947 from a plane. It was investigated on the ground about 2 months later and formally reported in 1949. But the local Jaru people had known this place for far longer. They call it Kandi Malal, and one of their traditional accounts describes an evening star that grew so hot it fell to the ground, causing an enormous explosion, a flash, and a cloud of dust, a story of something falling from the sky, told long before any geologist arrived. Today, you can technically reach it. It sits off the Tenoumer Road, roughly 150 kilometers south of the town of Halls Creek, but that's a rough, remote, mostly unsealed track, and in the wet season, it can become impassable entirely. Getting here means heat, dust, and real isolation. It's the easiest crater on this list to stand inside, and it's still one most people will only ever see from a satellite. From here, they only get harder to reach. From the Australian desert, we cross the planet to another one, the Western Sahara, in the North African country of Mauritania. And here, in a sea of pale, cracked, sun-blasted rock, sits one of the most improbably perfect shapes on Earth, Tenoumer Crater. On satellite imagery, it looks almost artificial, like a ring someone drew with a compass, a near-perfect circle about 1.9 kilometers, or 1.2 miles, across, with a raised rim standing roughly 110 meters, around 360 feet above the basin inside it. For years, that suspicious perfection actually caused an argument among scientists. When researchers found volcanic rocks like basalt near the structure, some argued Tenoumer wasn't an impact crater at all, that it was the mouth of an ancient volcano, a caldera. It's a reasonable mistake. A circle this clean, this sharp, doesn't look like the messy aftermath of a cosmic collision, but the evidence eventually settled it. Rocks around the crater show the telltale signs of an impact, including melt rock that appears to have been flash fused by heat and pressure far beyond anything a volcano produces here. Tenoumer is now firmly classified as an impact crater, and a surprisingly young one. Current estimates put it at around 1.57 million years old. The problem is getting to it. Tenoumer sits deep in the Mauritanian Sahara, far from paved roads and far from any town of size. Reaching it means a serious desert expedition, long stretches of open sand and rock, extreme heat, and no infrastructure to fall back on. There are no facilities here, no signs, no way station. Just a flawless dark ring sitting in the middle of one of the emptiest places on Earth, waiting for the rare traveler willing to spend days crossing the desert to stand on its rim. And it is far from the hardest crater on this list to reach. We stay in the Sahara, but move east and deeper into it, into the vast central desert of southern Algeria. Somewhere out in this immense roadless emptiness lies Amguid crater, and it comes with a reputation that's rare among the craters of the world. It's considered one of the single hardest impact craters on Earth to actually get to. Amguid is smaller than the last two, only about 500 to 530 meters across, roughly 1,600 to 1,700 feet, and around 65 meters, or a bit over 200 feet, deep. But what it lacks in size, it makes up for in sheer purity of form. It's a beautifully circular bowl with a sharp raised rim, its floor covered in fine wind-blown sand, and slabs of cracked, dried clay. Because it sits in such a bone-dry, plant-free part of the Sahara, there's almost nothing to erode or disguise it. It stayed crisp and clean, and it's young by crater standards, probably less than 100,000 years old. Here's the strange part of its story. Amguid was first noticed the same way so many of these are from the air, spotted by a surveyor named Karpov back in 1948. But it was decades before anyone properly described it scientifically, in 1969, and it remains, to this day, understudied. Not because it isn't interesting, but because it's so remote and so difficult to reach that researchers simply can't get out to it easily. Think about that. In an age where we've mapped the entire surface of the planet from orbit, there are still craters we can see perfectly from space and barely visit on foot. Amguid is one of them, a flawless bullseye in the deep Sahara that the satellites know far better than we do. And the next one takes that idea and adds a warning. You're not even allowed to go. Now we travel south, down to the Namib Desert of Namibia, one of the oldest and driest deserts on the planet. And here, half buried in an ocean of sand dunes, is a crater with a very particular problem. It's not just remote, it's off limits. This is Kamm, and it sits inside one of the most heavily restricted areas in all of Africa. First, the crater itself. Kamm is about 2.5 kilometers, or 1.6 miles, across, and the rim rises noticeably out of the flat desert around it. Its true depth is a strange story. The crater is thought to be around 130 meters, over 400 feet deep, but you'd never guess it standing there, because at least 100 meters of wind-blown sand have poured in and buried the original floor. It's ancient by the standards of this list, roughly 4.8 million years old. And here's a haunting detail. The object that made it was, by some estimates, only about the size of an SUV. It hit so hard and so fast that it essentially vaporized on impact. No meteorite fragments were ever recovered. The thing that dug this hole simply ceased to exist. But the reason Kamm is on a list of impossible to reach places isn't the sand. It's the law. The crater lies within the Sperrgebiet, a German word that translates, quite literally, to forbidden territory. This is a restricted diamond mining zone, sealed off for more than a century after diamonds were discovered in these sands in the early 1900s. For generations, ordinary people simply could not enter. It's a stretch of desert patrolled and controlled precisely to keep outsiders away, and much of it remains tightly regulated to this day. So Kamm is a crater you can circle endlessly on Google Earth, a perfect scar about 80 kilometers north of the coastal town of Aorounga, and never legally set foot in. It's forbidden ground, guarding a hole punched by something the size of a car. And from here, the craters don't just get harder to reach, they start to vanish. We move north now, into one of the most forbidding corners of the entire Sahara, the far north of Chad, out near the Tibesti Mountains, close to the Libyan border. And this is where the whole premise of this list, that some craters only make sense from above, becomes literally true, because Aorounga crater is a place you could stand inside and never realize it. On the ground, Aorounga is a chaos of wind-carved rock ridges, called yardangs, and slow-marching fields of sand dunes, all of it stretching to the horizon. There's no obvious bowl, no clean rim, no single hole to point at, but rise up into orbit, and the truth appears. From space, an enormous set of concentric rings emerges out of the desert, an outer ring and an inner ring, with the central peak sitting in the middle, like the eye of a target. The exposed structure is around 12.6 kilometers, nearly 8 miles across, and some analyses suggest the full structure may reach as much as 16 kilometers when you account for all of it. And this is the incredible part. For a long time, nobody knew it was here. Aorounga was revealed not by an explorer on foot, but by a space shuttle. Radar instruments flown on the shuttle were able to see through and past the confusing surface, mapping the buried rings hidden beneath the sand and stone. It took looking down from space with radar eyes to recognize that this patch of desert was the grave of a massive ancient impact, one that happened somewhere in the vast window of the last few 100 million years, with exposure dating suggesting the surface here has been sitting exposed for at least 500,000 years. This region of Chad is punishingly remote, blisteringly hot, and historically unstable, a place expeditions rarely reach. So for all practical purposes, Aorounga is a crater we know almost entirely from above. The satellites can see it perfectly. Almost no human ever has. And the next crater trades the heat of the desert for thin, freezing air at the roof of the world. From the deserts of Africa, we climb nearly 4 kilometers straight up into the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan, one of the highest and most isolated mountain regions on the planet, wedged up against the borders of Afghanistan and China. Here, sitting in the thin, freezing air, is a dark, wind-whipped lake called Karakul, whose name means Black Lake. And Karakul is hiding something enormous. The lake itself is about 25 kilometers, 16 miles across, and it sits at an astonishing elevation of around 3,960 meters, nearly 13,000 feet above sea level. Its western basin plunges to depths of over 220 meters. For a long time, it was just known as a strikingly circular, high-altitude lake. But then, in the 1980s, researchers studying imagery taken from space realized what they were looking at. That circle wasn't the lake. The lake is only sitting inside a far larger scar. Karakul fills the middle of an impact crater whose rim stretches an incredible 52 kilometers, about 32 miles across. It is one of the highest altitude impact structures known anywhere on Earth. Getting here is a genuine ordeal. Karakul lies along the Pamir Highway, one of the highest and most punishing roads in the world, a route that crosses passes over 4,000 meters high, batters vehicles, and starves engines and lungs alike of oxygen. The lake sits frozen for much of the year, ringed by barren mountains, near a heavily sensitive border region where you don't wander freely. It took the view from orbit for anyone to even recognize this was the site of a cosmic impact, a 52-kilometer wound in the roof of the world, so big and so high that from the ground, it just looks like mountains and a lake. From here, we leave the deserts and the mountains behind entirely and head for the ice. Now, we go to the Arctic. Far in the north of Quebec, Canada, on the treeless Ungava Peninsula, there is a crater so clean, so round, and so startlingly blue that the people of the region gave it a name centuries ago, the Crystal Eye of Nunavik. Officially, it's the Pingualuit crater, and it might be the single most beautiful entry on this entire list. From above, it's almost impossibly perfect, a near flawless circle, about 3.44 kilometers, or a little over 2 miles, across, with a rim that rises around 160 meters above the flat, empty tundra. But the real wonder is what fills it. Inside the crater sits a lake, and that lake is extraordinary. It's about 267 meters deep, nearly 900 feet, one of the deepest lakes in North America. And the water is some of the purest fresh water in the world. It has almost no salt in it, a salinity of less than 3 parts per million, because the crater has no rivers flowing in and no rivers flowing out. It's fed only by rain and snow. The water is so clear that scientists have lowered a measuring disc more than 35 meters over 115 feet down into it before it disappears from view. That's among the clearest natural water ever recorded, and it's nearly impossible to reach. There are no roads here. None. The crater was actually first captured by a U.S. Army Air Force plane that photographed it on the 20th of June 1943 during the Second World War, but its images stayed obscure for years afterward. It wasn't until July of 1951 that a geologist named Ben Mean led the first real ground expedition to it, arriving by flying boat. Even today, reaching Pingualuit means flying deep into the Arctic and then traveling overland across raw tundra. There is no easy way in, and no one lives at its shore. It sits out there, a perfect eye of crystal clear water, holding in its deep sediments a frozen record of ancient ice ages, staring straight up at the satellites that are, for almost everyone on Earth, the only way we'll ever see it. And yet, as remote as it is not the most untouched crater on this list. For our final crater, we go to one of the loneliest places on the entire planet, the Arctic wilderness of Chukotka, in the far northeast of Siberia, Russia. There is no road here, no town, no shoreline anyone lives on, just tundra and cold, stretching in every direction. And in the middle of it lies a nearly circular lake with a name most people can't pronounce, Elgi. This is the climax of our list, not because it's the biggest or the deepest, but because of what it is and what it has quietly kept safe for 3.5 million years. Elgi sits inside an impact crater whose rim is about 18 kilometers 11 miles across, formed by a violent collision roughly 3.6 million years ago. The lake filling it is about 12 kilometers wide and around 174 meters, some 570 feet deep. Those are impressive numbers, but they're not the reason scientists risk everything to get here. The reason is one almost unbelievable fact. This crater was never covered by glaciers. Through ice age after ice age, as sheets of ice crushed and scraped and erased the landscape across most of the northern world, this one small basin was somehow always spared. And because the ice never came, nothing ever wiped the slate clean. Layer upon layer of sediment simply kept settling on the lake bottom, undisturbed, year after year, for millions of years, until roughly 400 meters, over 1,300 feet, of it had built up. That mud is a time machine. It holds a continuous, unbroken record of the Earth's climate stretching back around 3.6 million years, the longest such record ever recovered from the terrestrial Arctic. Reading it is like opening a diary the planet has been keeping since long before human beings existed. So, in the winter of 2008 and 2009, an international team did something extraordinary. They hauled a drilling rig out into this frozen nowhere, a place you essentially cannot reach except by helicopter or across the ice in the depths of winter. And they drilled straight down into the crater floor to pull that record out. What they found was sobering. The mud revealed that during a warm period in the deep past, the Arctic here was around 8 degrees Celsius hotter than it is today, at a time when the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere may have been similar to what we're producing now. A crater that survived every ice age turned out to be holding a warning about heat. And that is what makes Elgi the perfect final entry. It is almost impossible to reach no roads, no people, helicopter only, buried in Siberian ice. It is a shape that only truly makes sense from above. And it has been sitting there, untouched, for 3.5 million years, quietly recording everything, waiting for us to finally look down and see it. What's strange about this list is how much of it we owe to the view from above. For almost all of human history, a crater like Aorounga or Karakul was invisible just rock or sand, or a lake ringed by mountains. It took planes, then satellites, then radar fired down from a space shuttle before we could finally recognize these places for what they are, the scars left behind when the sky fell. Some of them we still can't reach on foot. A few we're not even allowed to. And one of them, frozen in the Siberian Arctic, has been keeping a record of our planet far longer than we've been able to read it. So out of all of these, which crater would you most want to stand inside if you actually could? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, check out my video on the most impossible to reach islands on Google Earth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.